Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Omari, what's going on, man? You look confused about my video on Twitter today. That's a tractor and a combine, and we are cutting wheat here in Kansas at the end of June. Excuse me, end of July.
I was confused. I think you've tweeted that once before, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, I have no clue what this device is doing. I've been, like farms for me growing up were like field trips. I'm a city boy, so that's a different way of life, man.
Yeah, I said June because that's usually when we're cutting wheat, and then all of a sudden here at the end of June, 1st of July, it decided to just pour and rain. And if you see the video, if you are on Twitter, you can see all the weeds in the midst of the wheat, and that's because of the rain. It took us forever to get into the field. But Shawn Windsor has joined us to talk about the weeds of the offseason. And Shawn, do you have any experience with farming and wheat and what is you seem like a guy that knows a little bit about everything.
Well, I don't know about that. By the way, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I always love jumping in with you guys. I don't know, not wheat, Bryce, but corn. I did tasseled corn when I was a kid living in downstate Illinois, outside of Champaign, where the University of Illinois is, as you probably know. And I would walk back in those days, this is in the 70s, you'd walk the rows and you'd have to pick the tassels from the top. It had to do with how it cross-pollinated, and you had to get out there at daybreak, and it was still kind of cool and wet, and you'd cut yourself on the leaves on the corn. And that was summer work for a while. But then, on the other hand, I bagged groceries in Tokyo one summer, so I was kind of all over the place.
Yeah, that's a leap from bagging corn in Illinois.
It's true. It's true. But yeah. So anyway, how are you doing, Omar? You back? I know it's getting hot here in Michigan, but are you survived that heat okay from Vegas?
Yeah, I got out. We it was like a baton pass. I left Wednesday and you got in Tuesday, and that was right when it really began to get hot. It was 111, 112, and I was there. And then it got up to 117, 118.
Yep.
And the thing, when it's that hot, you feel every degree. I feel like the difference from 100 to 110 is 60 to 80. It's crazy.
It sure is. And not only that, as you remember, as I'm sure, there was a breeze. And you were out there too, right, Bryce?
Yep.
There was a little bit of a breeze, and you like a breeze if it's 90. Here, a breeze feels pretty good, and here in Michigan, if at 90, but a breeze at that temperature at 118, it's a convection of it. It doesn't feel good at all. It just makes it worse.
And that's why Shawn was supposed to join us last week, but his flight got delayed because the airport tarmac was burning up or whatever was going on.
It's true. That's what Delta told me, that the tires and the temp of the tarmac. It was a mid-afternoon flight, which is probably the worst. It was a 3:00 flight, so right at about the hottest point of the day, right?
And I heard we had you overbooked today, Shawn. I just got word this is your 3rd recording of a podcast here just today. So you've been on it all day long talking, I don't know if just Pistons. I assume you were talking Lions and other Detroit sports as well.
Well, yeah. And the first one is one I do every week called The Soul of Detroit, which we probably shouldn't call that because we record in Ferndale. You know what I mean? And with Mike Elrick, ML Elrick, who our readers at the Free Press know, he's an investigative columnist. And we talk about all sorts of stuff. We had the writer Elmore Leonard, the Detroit writer. A lot of his novels are turned into movies. Out of Sight with George Clooney. I'm trying to think of others. Get Shorty. Did you ever see Get Shorty with John Travolta? No. In any case, we had somebody that worked with him on. So, we do all sorts of quirky, eclectic, Detroit-based stuff, but generally not sports, occasionally sports.
Well, we're going to talk sports today. We're going to talk about the Pistons. And Shawn, let's talk about Summer League because, as Omari alluded to, he was out there for the first few days. I was out there at the same time. Everybody knows that. And then you came out, you got a chance to watch the Pistons. You kind of covered them those last, I think, 3 games. So let's start with the rookie and number 5 overall pick, Ausar Thompson. I assume you probably watched the first 2 games as well, but I know you were around the team. You saw him in person. Kind of what were your expectations going into Summer League after he was drafted, Shawn? And then after seeing him play, did things change? And kind of what was your perspective on this youngster?
Like a lot of folks, I hadn't seen a lot of them other than film and clips and so forth, and what you read and how the Pistons describe them and so forth. So I the first thing that jumped out to me, Bryce, was just how he moves. And I don't mean just the quickness. He's got the burst, nor the hops, which everybody said he went viral a couple times with a couple of dunks, one the putback dunk in particular. But I'm just talking about, and forget for a second the way he anticipates and all that. Just literally the way he moves. It's he glides, and it's effortless, and he's got a long stride, and he covers a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And I just like. Look, the transition stuff was great and the way he gets up and down the court, but I like the way he would rotate out on a shooter, for example. If the ball comes over to the weak side, this happened a few times actually, and he would close out in perfect balance, not bite on the pump fake, and either force the kick back or a tough shot. And he did that it was just the movement that struck me first and foremost.
I think that's what stood out to me as well is, and you mentioned you don't see much of overtime elite, obviously being a new league, but just the way he moves, he just glides, and you combine that with his instincts, and it just seemed like he harassed everybody he defended. I mean, he gave Grady Dick fits like that entire game, and you just look at him 6'6", 7'0". It's just one thing to see what he can do in overtime elite, and people talk about the competition and whatnot, but it kind of goes back to what Troy said about Holly Berry, right? But the guy that athletic, it's just tough to see how they don't make some sort of impact, even if the half court has a ways to go. Just in transition, I thought he was fantastic.
No, and I'm sure you guys saw this too. He just makes the right play over and over and over again on both ends, especially defensively. In the rotations, he's going to get beat one-on-one from time to time, right? He did in the summer league. Dick got him a couple of times, actually, and when he gets into the real games against the real big guys, he's going to get bodied, and people are going to have all sorts of tricks, and he's got to learn, and he's going to get not blown by, but he's going to get, taken advantage of here and there. But I just thought, I love the way he gets up and competes. He blocked Grady Dick's jump shot right out of the gate, right? You don't see that very often. I think it shocked Dick.
I think he blocked 3 or 4 shots over the course of the week. Like jumpers, though, not just like at the rim.
No, for sure. It was sort of shocking to watch him block jumpers, but even against some of the bigs, when he would rotate over at the rim, again, you're talking fundamentally, he was always straight up. His chest was always in, so he wasn't picking up the foul. He never brought his hands down, as hard as that is to do. When you put both hands up, you're taught that. It's hard not to swipe, but he wouldn't. He would stay perfectly upright, and the way he could control his body with the jump without fouling against sometimes bigs who were trying to finish on the dump down or the kickoff or whatever, right? That was, to me, is as impressive as anything else he did.
Well, I think his off-ball defense is what is really exciting. I think on-ball, because you brought it up, he's going to get beat, but he has the athleticism and the body type, especially as he puts on some more strength. He's going to be able to at least take those matchups. I don't know how you feel, Shawn or Omari, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of just lockdown defenders. You're going to put this guy on LeBron James and completely wipe him. It just doesn't happen. It's the NBA. But you can take a SAR and say, guard that guy tonight for 30 minutes, and at least it's not Cade or somebody like that having to exert that energy. But then a SAR can also make these rotations like you're talking about, Shawn, and he can contest at the rim as a low man. That's one thing that Jeremy Grant was really good at that I think this team has missed, is like a weak side low man rotate, contest at the rim. And that's something a SAR is going to do really well. So that leads me into this. For me, Shawn, he's more ready to play right away than what I thought, at least based off what we saw in Summer League. I didn't think it was going to be really close, him being ready when he was drafted. But after what I saw, I think he can contribute day one just with doing all these little things, quote unquote.
I completely agree. That was what I came away with. And on both ends, and again, he's the strength defensively for one-on-one, that'll come, but he's still going to have nights where he bothers guys, right? For sure. That's going to happen. I think just his best attribute right now might be his rebounding. I had no idea. And in traffic, I saw him get man rebound after man rebound after man rebound, right? And he's not afraid of contact. And so that might be his best part of his defense. It's just the finishing of the play. How many times you see you force a miss and you can't go get it? What does it matter? Every game I watched him, he had double-digit rebounds. It was crazy.
The rebounding made me wonder if he could play power forward, small ball 5. Yeah, I mean small ball 4.
Yeah, you combine. He's physical. I mean, in other words, to Bryce's point, he can, I'm sure he'll get stronger and put a little weight on, but he's already really physical and likes to be physical. You can see that. And they struggled rebounding last year, right? Especially on the wing. But he rebounds like a 4-man, like a very athletic 4-man. You combine that with those crazy hops.
And the wingspan too.
And that's what I'm saying. If he rebounds that way and he can contest at the rim because he's long and athletic and has these rotations, now you legit can play him as a 4-man. And now the lack of shooting isn't quite as big a deal, right? On the offensive end, it's a little easier to put lineups around him where that's not as big an issue. I also want to ask both of you about this. And I'll start with you, Shawn. What about his ball handling, his ability to run the offense? I believe in it in transition. I think he can be a grab and go guy. How much do you think we see him this season running the show, I guess, in the second unit where he's kind of the quote unquote, whatever people want to say, point forward or however you want to say it? Do you think we see him doing much of that? Or do you think they ease him into that aspect of his game?
I would think they would ease him a little bit. So to me, he's best grabbing his own rebound or taking the first outlet and then making the next outlet. Or, I mean, like from the opposing rim to the free throw line, he's great. If everybody gets set up, his handle is good, but it's a little loose and it's a little high to me, especially if he's just going to try to break somebody down and create. But as a secondary guy, I can absolutely. I mean, he's a playmaker. There's no question. The way he sees cutters, the way he can cut himself. We haven't even talked about that. That's another elite skill he's got to me. But I don't know that his handle's quite there. But that does not. Where is it going to be at March? I mean, he might be one of these type young guys that just gets exponentially better in a hurry because of the way he sees the floor and the way he works. That's what I think. I
think he's a really above average secondary creator, but maybe not so much above average primary creator. So where do you see that, Omari, in terms of, is he just doing the thing Shawn outlined, grab and go, transition, lead the break, and then let guys make magic from there? Or do you see him creating in the half court? Is that a role he can be successful in?
He has some nice half-court passes, but I do think he's probably more of a transition, grab and go, find the open man at this point. And I think really from day one, I think you could just tap into that naturally, right? A player who can make the right reads is going to make the right reads, I think, regardless of level. And obviously, his teammates with the actual team would be a little bit better than in Vegas. So I thought he left some assists on the table, honestly, or probably should have had a few less turnovers than he had. He turned the ball over a lot, but really some of those were just maybe he passed it a little too hard or whatnot. I think that won't be a problem as much in the NBA. But I think the half court probably has a ways to go, like Shawn said, just because of the ball handling. He could probably make secondary reads, right? Like he's cutting and then find a big underneath, things along those lines. But you probably want him more so playing with Ivy, playing with Cade, Monte Morris, those guys, and just picking his spots as far as when he does have the ball in his hands.
If I could just say, one of the things I think he's going to have to figure out is, as a secondary guy, the ball gets kicked to him. He's not going to get the kind of closeout until he can prove he can shoot, and that might be a while. And so he's going to have to figure out how to operate in the space where the defender is not right up on him. I will say, though, that the half-court passes that I thought were – this is the thing. I think you've made this point, Bryce. I want to say you've talked about this. He struggles to finish weirdly.
Yeah.
For his size and athleticism, unless he's dunking. But he likes to finish with his offhand on the opposite side. In other words, if he's on the right side, he likes to finish with his left a little bit. He did that a few times, which is kind of slick. A couple times he did to avoid a block. But one thing I saw him do 3 or 4 times was take the ball on the wing, attack the rim, and kick it out, like whip, high velocity whip passes the corners, and a couple times even way back out on the wing from underneath the basket. So he sees that, and he's got the strength and the skill to do that. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of the scenario where he'll have that opportunity with somebody not up on him, but I bet there will be, right?
My one negative takeaway, or whatever you want to say, from Summer League with Asar is we saw him struggle with the things that he struggled with at OTE. If you just look at the finishing numbers, it looks pretty good whenever you have transition and offensive rebounds. But if you just look at his half court at the rim, especially taking away dunks, he wasn't very efficient this last year in OTE, and he wasn't even very efficient during these summer league games. And then obviously the jump shot as well. It was 30% in OTE, and he didn't shoot it well at summer league as well. I'm not overly concerned. I'm not saying this is something we just have to freak out about, because I think he showed all this other stuff in spades and way more than what I thought. I just want to make sure. What I'm worried about, Shawn, is fans are going to get overly excited about Ausar, and then when he quote unquote only averages 10 points a game but gets 8 rebounds and a few assists and a couple steals, they're not going to be happy with that. And it's like, no, this is who this kid is right now. Is he's not a 20-point a game guy. He's a do it all, take on the other team's best offensive player, rebound, all this other stuff we've talked about the first 15 minutes.
And I think along with that is just how unselfish he was. He didn't even necessarily look for his own shot as much. So I think when you have a player as unselfish as him who wants those defensive matchups, and the threes he took for the most part were just like open threes, or he hit a deep one at the end of the shot clock. But he kind of just let the game flow through him rather than maybe calling his own numbers. So I think that probably helps too.
No, for sure. And the few times where, to me, he looked best shooting was the one you mentioned, the end of the shot clock, or maybe it was the end of the quarter.
Yeah, it might have been the end of the
hit
quarter.
Because he's not thinking, right? And then he hit a couple of mid-range, one off a step back, where, again, it's bang, bang, and he's just going up and releasing and not thinking. And that actually looks a little bit better. So that gives you some that he can find that place, right? But and I'm with you. The things, your point, Bryce, about the struggles you saw at OTE, and they were absolutely there. The other thing, to me, he's going to have to figure out is how to navigate screens. That's just going to be reps. He did a couple times, he got lost a few times. That's where Dick kind of started scoring, was getting a ball screen, getting him off him a little bit, and him getting lost a little bit, right? That's just reps.
They're going to throw a lot at him. I mean, it's not easy. I don't care how good you are, or intense you are, or whatever. You go against these high-level offensive players, and they're going to have tricks, and he's going to get lost at times, and those things are going to happen. But I still think the fact, and Omari talked about this, so I want to talk about who he can play with, or who we think he'll thrive best with, and where he's going to fit into the rotation as it stands, assuming no other moves happen, is just taking on those matchups so other guys don't. Just think Bojan doesn't have to guard that guy anymore and go try to knock down shots on the offensive end. I think that's huge. So where do you see him, Shawn? Do you think he comes in and starts with Bojan at the 4? Do you think they want to start Stu at the 4? We can transition this a little bit into getting your thoughts on the Isaiah Stewart extension, or you think Ausar's better? Hey, let's bring him off the bench and just kind of slow play this a little bit. Where do you think this thing's going to play out with him?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess the single biggest thing I took out of Summer League was just what, no matter who was on the floor for the Pistons, when he was on the floor, they were 100 times better. And, obviously, it's Summer League, right? The level of players, whatever. But at some point, basketball is just really simple that way. When there's a guy that connects everything on both ends of the floor and makes winning play after winning play after winning play, even if it's not shooting, then you can play with anybody. And he reminds me, not in game or body or anything else, but it's a similar effect to Draymond with the Warriors. And they get away with two non-shooters, right, with him and Looney, because obviously Steph and Clay, and the Pistons don't have that luxury. But I wonder, to me, all the things he does, even just jumping a passing lane. How many times do you see that, Omari, in just those couple of games? Causing a loose ball, causing a break, right? That's a bucket. I mean, that's generally going to be a bucket at the other end. So that's not him shooting, but that's him creating offense. And I just saw that in so many different ways. I think he can play with anybody out there. He's that kind of player. He's the kind of player when you're at a pickup court and you're like, why does that team keep winning, right? You don't quite get it. But then there's this one dude that just knows how to play ball, and he's got a couple other guys around him, and he connects the team. And you can't get him off the court because of that dude. And that's kind of what he reminds me of.
This kind of hit me is OTE I don't think it really allowed him to show that because of the way the game was played. It was so much transition and a lot of the games weren't meaningful because they were blowouts. And it's almost like we weren't able to see that side of maybe better evaluators than me were. I watched a lot of his games, but I wasn't sure if he was really that connective tissue. And now I'm wondering if it's because of the structure of OT. And I'm not trying to crush OT, don't get me wrong, but he just wasn't really able to show that. So that's interesting. Omari, I know you wanted to add to that as well.
If he showed anything during Summer League, it's just that a lot of his game is going to translate, right? Like everything he did at OT, I think he'll do in the NBA. That's true for the pluses and the minuses, right? And I think what's tough to get a feel for is how much the minuses will limit his overall game. And I think when you see the unselfishness, but beyond that, like how active his hands were on defense, how willing he was to really just get up into guys, his balance, all those things. And you talk about being a connector. I think just in those 5 games, the confidence that he'll be able to do that in the NBA just skyrockets, right? Because it's just some stuff you can't teach. I know that's a cliche, but with him, it really is stuff you can't teach.
I think you can play 2 non-shooters. Shawn, we'll get your thoughts on this real quick before we go to break and then move on to some other. I think you can play 2 non-shooters in Ausar and Duren because those 2 guys are very unselfish and can pass the ball. So if you have 3 shooters around them, I think you can play with those 2 guys as non-shooters. Would that make you nervous just in terms of spacing and flow of the offense? Or do you think you could have 3 shooters, whoever you want that to be? There's some options on this team now with Ausar and Duren because those guys are connective tissue guys that can move the ball.
The spacing might be a little tight, but first of all, Duren's a great lob threat, right?
Yes. Yep.
Ausar will be too, to a different degree. So Duren can score plus with putbacks and or bunnies or whatever, and maybe offensive rebounding. He's got to get better at that. Duren does, but I feel like Thompson's an offensive player who just doesn't shoot. You know, I really do. And so when you say 2 non-shooters, yeah, but are they non-scorers? You know what I mean? Maybe not a traditional. He's not necessarily a bucket getter, but he's somebody that leads the buckets. And I guess it's going to depend on can Cunningham and Ivy make shots. I mean, that's what this really all depends on. Right? If they don't make shots, then this whole experiment is somebody else is going to be drafting players in a couple of years, right? I mean.
QT says it. You can play 2 non-shooters if you have 3 other shooters. Not sure Ivy and Cade are shooters yet. They're not, but you just said it, Shawn. At the end of the day, if Cade and Ivy don't become better shooters than what we've seen, especially Cade, Ivy shot decently actually on catch and shoots. But if they don't, none of it matters. Like this restoration is going to completely flip over and recycle and start over anyway. So at the end of the day, those guys have to be able to knock down shots because they can't just always be playing on the ball.
No, not at all. And it's funny. Ivy did make progress with the catch and shoot. I thought where Ivy took the biggest jump was the mid-range pull up off the dribble.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Sure.
Down the stretch. In fact, I wasn't at this game. You guys were, but the first Summer League game, he was just, in his own way, right? He was not. It's like he couldn't feel his hands and feet in a way.
Yeah.
But at some point, he just said, "All right, I'm going to go do what I started doing down the stretch." And he got the ball and he went and took a dribble or 2 and he pulled up from maybe a little bit beyond the elbow and just calmly knocked it down. And I was like, that is a pro shot and move. And I think as long as that's there, the 3 might go up and down a little bit, right? But he can just go get if he becomes a guy who can go get a bucket, then yeah.
All right, we're going to go to a short break, and then we're going to keep talking about Jaden Ivey, Omari. We'll talk about Duren, Wiseman, maybe some Marcus Sasser. But when we first come back, let's get back into some Jaden Ivey, what we saw from Summer League, and some expectations for this upcoming season.
All right, back with segment 2, and we're going to dive right into Jaden Ivey again here. I feel like he scared people with his first game because you expect him to come in and, second-year guy, second-team all-rookie to come in and dominate, and that didn't quite happen. But I thought the difference from game 1 to game 2 was pretty pronounced. And even in game 1, maybe he was pressing a little bit, but, I also saw some continuation of what we saw last season as far as him leaning into his jumper a little bit more. And game 2, those shots just started to fall. I guess one, Shawn, how much, if at all, do you think his struggles in that game 1 mean anything? I tend to ascribe more, Summer League, it is what it is. And what did you see during game 2 that you really liked?
I don't necessarily. I mean, Jared Jack made the comment after the game, the summer league coach for the Pistons, that he had not played with that group.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that probably can sound like an excuse, and maybe in some ways it is, but he said it for a reason. That does matter a little bit, and he probably was a little bit jacked up. The other thing too that I wouldn't worry too much about, because I'm trying to think of an example. Max Christie played really, really well as a second-year guy for the Lakers. And you see that who's the Kings who drafted right before Ivy, the Kings Murray. Murray went nuts.
Yeah,
and
they saw him out.
And Jabari Smith Jr. A lot of those.
Right, yeah, exactly. So you want to see that, but the difference between those three guys, and I know Christie was a little bit inconsistent even at Michigan State, but I think of Christie as a shooter. He's a shooter. And I think that'll play out over his career. Smith is obviously a shooter, and so is Murray. Ivy's not. So I think it's a little easier to come in there and just, if you have the one thing, because Ivy to me is still more of a scorer. And we were talking about Thompson. I'm curious what you guys think. We were talking about Thompson earlier and how he connects. And when he's on the floor, the team's just better. It's a little bit opposite with Ivy to me right now. It's not that Ivy's not a winner. I'm not saying that. But a lot of his gifts are singular, and they're for him, if that makes any sense, right? They get him to the. Now he has shown, I think, great passing skill, especially relative to what everybody thought he was coming out of Purdue. But he's still got to figure out how to play and sort of affect in the way that just comes naturally to Thompson, right? I think he probably has a higher ceiling in some ways. But to me, that's the thing with him. And when you have that kind of game, you're still trying to figure that out. You can't just come out and start making 7, 8 threes like those other guys we talked about did.
I don't think Ivy was in a great situation to do that at Summer League. I still think his best role, and Omari and I have talked about this a lot, and I think he's going to agree with me, is next to Cade Cunningham. I think he's going to look his best when he's playing next to Cade, not when he just, in those games, Omari, they essentially gave Jaden the ball and just said, pound it and go do your thing. And he threw some, off-target pass. If you go watch his turnovers, a couple of them are just lobs that are a little bit too high for Dern. It wasn't all just awful decisions. He just was a little bit out of sorts. And then he had 20 and 10 in the second game, makes mid-rangers, 10 assists. I'm going to wait to rush to any sort of judgment about Jaden Ivey till I see him for as many games as possible playing next to a Cade Cunningham, which is, I think, where he will be at his best, Omari.
Yeah, you want him to attack and you want to limit his decision tree. When Jaden starts to think too much and too hard, I think that's when he begins to run into trouble. I noticed even last season, a lot of times, those first couple jumpers he would take would dictate his game. If he got an early put up 3 to fall, he's scoring 30, right? And if he struggles in the first quarter, he's probably not going to get it back. So I think having Cade next to him, you're the second point of attack instead of the first, will do wonders for him. I really do. We'll have to see what that looks like in action. But to me, he is a 2 who could play the 1. Like, I keep using the Donovan Mitchell comparison, but you don't necessarily want to rely on him as your primary playmaker. He'll have games where he's really feeling it, but just that consistency for him hasn't really been there yet. And, I just think he's being asked to do a lot. And once he can just focus more on himself, we'll start to see things click into place.
Shawn, do you agree? Do you have concerns if that's who Jaden Ivey is? Because I kind of, you think about how they constructed this roster. You have Cade, you've added Monty Morris, you drafted Marcus Sasser. You have a lot of other guys that can handle the ball where Jaden Ivey doesn't have to, or do you think he needs to really grow into that to kind of be the player this team and organization needs him to be, where he can play more as the on-ball creator, making other guys better? Or is it okay if he's a guy that eventually just gets 25 a game, 20 to 25 a game, and it's a little bit just more about him, but maybe not creating as much for everybody else?
You mentioned Donovan Mitchell, Omari. That depends on one thing Mitchell does is he shoots threes off the bounce. Ivy doesn't do that yet. And if he gets to that point where he can shoot threes off the bounce, then he's a 2 who can be a 1. But if he doesn't, to me, in a perfect world, he figures out how to run the team when Cunningham's on the bench, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not that you have to have that, but I just go back to the ball he played down the stretch last year. I remember when Spoelstra started doubling him when they played the Heat late in the season at the Palace. You remember that, Omari? It was kind of shocking, actually, how good he was that night, right? It kept them in a game against a team fighting for a playoff spot.
When Ivy's hot, he's hot.
but in his decision making too, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think his handle has gotten better. There's probably still a little bit more room for that and the decision making, to your point, Bryce. But I wouldn't put a ceiling on this guy just yet. I don't have any idea what he can become, but I think he has a chance to be special.
Well, and maybe it's a thing where you're talking about where in smaller samples, he's really going to flourish. It's not like the game you're talking about where he did it all game long. But if you're doing it when Cade's off the floor, he's usually going to be doing it against second unit. So he's not even doing it against starters. But yeah, I mean, obviously that'd be great if essentially you don't need a backup point guard because Jaden Ivey's your backup point guard. And I do think eventually Asar can take some of those reps as a primary creator a couple years down the road. So I wasn't overly worried about his summer league. I thought what my biggest worry with Jaden Ivey is his off-ball defense. That's my biggest worry. To be honest, I thought his on-ball defense at Summer League was solid. I thought he had a lot of mishaps off-ball where he just caught ball watching, lost his man, those things.
Like Westbrook, right? I mean, and it's funny because I always think about the Thunder. Troy Weaver talks about building like the old Pistons and all that, and I understand all that for the narrative, and that's cool. But he's really built a team a little bit like the Thunder. Those were great teams, and they couldn't shoot a lick, really, other than Durant. Now, Durant's a pretty big outlier, right? But seriously, think about those teams. Who could shoot on those teams? I mean, Ibaka became a shooter, but no, he didn't shoot like that when he was with the Thunder.
There. Yeah, later in his career, he was one of those guys.
And they were really good because they were long and physical and athletic as all heck, and they defended. And they attacked the rim relentlessly. And you wonder if that's a little bit what they've got going here, right?
I mean, you hope those guys could shoot, though. You could replicate that, but I think you certainly hope Isaiah Stewart, Ivy, Cade, all these guys can shoot because so far none of their lottery picks have really shown the ability to shoot the ball, and you may have some hope long term that they will, but that's something that I don't know if that's the recipe for success in the modern NBA, and those OKC teams always kind of petered out after a certain point as well.
What did you think about the Isaiah Stewart extension? We didn't get a chance to talk to you and ask you about that yet. Just here to detour just off Summer League just a little bit, and we'll talk about a couple of the other big men and James Wiseman, Jalen Duren. But what were your thoughts on the Isaiah Stewart extension?
I thought it was a reasonable contract relative to the rest of the league and what rotation guys get paid. I mean, was it $15 million a year, $14 million a year? I can't remember off the top of my 15. Head, but 15, yeah. I thought that was pretty reasonable for a guy who's either going to be your sixth man or your starting four, maybe your seventh man. But if you're Troy Weaver and you're trying to build this team and you got a guy you feel is integral to the huddles and to the bench, I'm just talking about the chemistry and the communication on the bench, the locker room, obviously, and then even what he can do on the court and the way he can, defend and switch and. I don't think he's a great defensive player. He's versatile out on the perimeter. He may become that. The shooting would be good, but he's competitive. He fights. And they didn't always fight last year. And I'm not saying that's what they got going this year. I think Thompson's going to help with that too, and Cunningham getting back. But to me, he plays with a certain spirit, and that's worth $15 million.
Omar, how much do you think that like off the court stuff really paid into what contract Stewart ended up getting, just beyond the on-court belief in the shooting and some of those things?
I mean, I think it certainly factored in. End of the year, Troy Weaver talking about Isaiah and Cade. He said he thought Isaiah shoulder injury. I think he missed the last 15, 20 games or so. It was just as bad for the team as losing Cade was for the season. And I think last year we really saw Isaiah Stewart, step up behind the scenes, and he's taking Jalen Duren, under his wing to a degree. He really is one of the most fiery competitors on this team, and I really think we're going to see that kind of pay forward more, assuming this team eventually gets to the playoffs, that he is that emotional leader. But, the front office loves him. They really see him as the heart and soul spirit of this team. That absolutely factored into it and factored into his value with the Pistons.
Can I ask you guys a question real quick? I mean, it's sort of an obvious answer, but why did the Denver Nuggets win the title, right? I mean, okay, fine. They got Jokic and Murray, and you got to start there. But they don't win the title despite those two guys unless they've got some Isaiah Stewart kind of players. And I don't mean in size and skill level order. I'm talking about in attitude and competitive spirit. And that's Bruce Brown and Caldwell Pope to a degree, and even Aaron Gordon, who's turned himself into that kind of nasty player in the best possible way, right? That's the difference with the Nuggets, are those three guys.
Even Christian Brown, and I got to give him a shout out because he's a Kansas kid, but like he kind of obviously completely different player, Shawn. But
no, he had some sass.
That's his thing. That's what he was known for. People look at him and they think, oh, he's not known for his 3-point shooting. He's known for being tough and having an attitude and a certain swagger and confidence, and that stuff plays out in the playoffs. Omari, we've been saying this for a while. I think Shawn, you agree. Isaiah Stewart's real worth will most likely show out in the playoffs when this team hopefully gets there. And it doesn't show up as much in the regular season because that attitude and mentality is shown more behind the scenes at practice, film sessions, those type of things, not necessarily during the games. We got to I want to talk about another big man, James Wiseman. I feel like it was a mixed bag, a mixed reaction from Summer League. Shawn, where are you at with James Wiseman? You didn't get to see him play in person, I don't think, but you watched the 2 games he played. Where's Wiseman at with this team? What are your expectations for what we see from this kid this upcoming year?
I don't want to go against my own sort of philosophy of being a human being that you ever give up on anybody, right? No matter how old they are, whatever they're doing in their life. And he's young playing basketball and still has a ways to go. I mean, I bet if you looked at his game logs, he's barely got over a season worth of games at this point, right? Maybe
he's barely played more minutes than Jalen Duren. I think
when he got traded to Detroit, Jalen Duren had played more minutes than him.
What's not there is concerning. It's hard to put your finger on what he's missing, right? I mean you can, but there's just something.
84 games, Shawn. 84 games.
Okay, so 2 more games in one regular season, right? And plus the injuries and so forth. And that always takes a little bit, especially when you're big and it's a knee. And he's big and had a knee injury. A meniscus, I think, when he was at Golden State, right? I don't think it was ligament damage. In any case, there are just a few things, Bryce, you probably worry about the same. His hands, for one. His footwork, right, for another. I mean, he's athletic. You can see the want to. He wants to, but it's like he wants to, but he can't bring the rest of himself to get where he wants. He's athletic and quick, but he's not explosive. And I don't think it's because he doesn't play hard. I feel like he thinks he's playing hard. He just hasn't. I don't know what. There's something there between his brain wanting to go and do and not getting there. And maybe some of it is not knowing where to be, especially defensively, especially off the ball, where he really, really struggles. But I just think you nick him a little bit for the hands and the feet, despite the fact that he's got a nice touch shooting, right? And a lack of feel. So, it's probably, I don't know. I have no idea if he'll ever figure that out. It's kind of a lot to figure out despite all the physical tools.
Yeah, I feel like it hasn't done him any favors that he's always playing with another center. Like, I think that kind of puts you naturally out of position where you see him and Duren shooting threes, which in Summer League is fine. But, I think that does kind of muck the evaluation a little bit. But I also think I think the way that Wiseman naturally attacks the game is just not what you need from a modern center. He likes to, post up, take his time, take those shots from like 6 to 8 feet, like those hooks and whatnot. He'll take the occasional jumper. But defensively, he's not really where you need him to be. He's not, his rim protection, he has moments, but he's not really aware to the extent that you need him to be. On switches, he doesn't quite have the foot speed. So it's just, when you look at what you want from a modern big, how many of those boxes has James Wiseman checked? And I feel like he really hasn't so far. He's been out of place defensively. He likes to play with his back to the basket, which is just an obsolete way of attacking the game, unless you're like Jokic or whatever and can pass out of it. And, I think it's just going to be tough to kind of fit him in, unless he embraces screening, quick rows, can make passing reads because seems like to double team him, stuff like that. So he has the tools to do it. It's just actually applying it.
The last thing for me on him, the most important thing that I would say about him is he doesn't own the space he occupies.
No.
He just doesn't. And I don't know how that's such an intangible kind of thing. You just know when you see it. It's hard to diagnose, right? I mean, obviously, basketball minds a lot smarter than we are in the NBA level. Haven't been able to figure it out with him yet, right? But but we know enough to know that it's just he doesn't occupy the space he's in the way that he needs to.
I had a clip where he came over and played with really nice verticality. We were talking about this earlier, right? 2 hands straight up. And it was against, I think, Kevon Harris from the Magic. And he should have just swarmed him, swallowed him up. And he just ended up giving up the space, and he made the bucket and against a 6'4" player. And it was a little... I couldn't even figure out exactly why it happened, why he didn't. I think that's what's hard, Shawn. You described it perfectly. There's a lot of things to like, but it's not getting there. And whatever's in between is just really hard to figure out. I want to ask real quick before we go to break, and then we will talk about Duren a little bit, Sasser, and then the Tom Gores stuff. Who do you have more trust in behind Jalen Duren right now? James Wiseman or Marvin Bagley III?
Well, Bagley's been more, if we're just going by the past, and it's not fair to Wiseman, of course, but Bagley's been more productive.
Yeah.
And he plays with, and not that he's super physical, but he plays with more of an edge than Wiseman. I know that's relative, right? I'm not trying to bang on Bagley, but there was a stretch where he was healthy and Cunningham was healthy. And that was a nice little kind of lob thread. I'm thinking of a game in Boston in particular. Not last year, but maybe the year before.
The year he was really good whenever he came to Detroit post-trade, he and Cade looked really good together. So I think that's going to be fascinating, Omari, to see how that plays out, those minutes behind what we assume will be the starter in Jalen Duren.
Yeah, too many bigs who are natural fits at center. And we talk about Isaiah Stewart playing the 4, but, there's going to be nights where he's your small ball 5 too, especially if they get to the point where they're in the playoffs, like they're going to skew in that direction. So, they've got some stuff to figure out with that group long term, especially with Wiseman, being extension eligible now. He's in an awkward spot where he needs to prove himself to get that next contract. And I just don't know if the minutes are going to be there for him.
Maybe Monty Williams can help, right? I mean, Iden was kind of pretzeled up too. I think he's probably an overall better player than Wiseman, but he's no more skilled, right? And maybe Monty Williams can help unlock him a little.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. We're going to go a short break here. When we come back, we're going to talk Jalen Duren. We're going to talk a little bit of Marcus Sasser, and then get into some of those Tom Gore quotes that Shawn and Omari got at Summer League.
All right, back with segment 3. Let's talk about the last big man, Jalen Duren, who kind of flashed his best Kevin Durant impersonation, on a couple of possessions. Shawn, what stood out about Duren, and what did you see maybe where he's improved from last season, and maybe some areas he still needs to work on?
Well, he still needs to work on his defense, but that did look a little bit better, right? I mean, his one-on-one defense, I think, is fine. He's got to get a little bit better about getting low sometimes, making sure, the way he fights for positioning. But his competitive spirit is like Isaiah Stewart's, right? It's evident. You see it the minute he steps on the floor. His off-ball defense obviously still needs work, but that looked a little bit better. But he just looked more comfortable overall on both ends. Obviously, he made some headlines didn't he even hit a step back 3?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
caught it and took a step back. Yeah.
I mean, you can see, not a future 30-point game guy, but you can see, maybe making a few shots here and there, right? Not afraid to hit the open 12-footer or take it anyway. He's not going to be Jokic on the block, but so what?
I saw some people frustrated with him doing some of that stuff, and I realized it's not what he's going to be doing. I was okay with it. It's Summer League. What did we really need to see Jalen Duren catching more lobs, Omari? We already know he can do that. I didn't need to see him doing that. This was my whole G League thing a year ago, and I know I take a lot of crap for that, but it's because I think he has this stuff in his game long term. I think he can knock down 15-footers. I think he can put it on the deck a little bit. And I'll say this, I'm not super in the know of Monty's offense. We saw every one of the Pistons bigs going down to Tosan and Nunge and all of those guys in the final games catch the ball at the top of the key and then go to the basket off the bounce. So I don't think that was just a Summer League thing where we're going to see Jalen Duren do that. Now, it may normally be a dribble at a DHO action, but at times I think Monty wants those guys getting downhill to keep the defense honest. And I think Jalen Duren can do that against certain bigs, Omari. So I wasn't that upset that he was doing some of these more fun, creative things, however you want to say it.
Yeah, I wasn't either. I think the thing with JD is just the fact that he hit the shots, right? Like maybe you don't want to dribble as much as he did. I mean, again, it's Summer League. It's not a big deal, but just to show that he had some shooting touch. And he works at his jumper a lot. I mean, we see him and Isaiah Stewart, and even back we get Wiseman take part in shooting drills after every practice. I mean, we saw it in Vegas and we saw it all last season. So it's not like he hadn't taken a three in like a long time and then decided all of a sudden, like, yeah, I'm going to start taking these. It's something he's worked on. I think down the road, we could see him begin to take those shots. But I think along with that, and we'll see if this holds true with Monty, but with Dwayne Casey, typically the do things guys showed in their bag during Summer League would carry over into the season, right? Like we saw Sadiq really begin to expand his game as far as taking more shots at the perimeter, driving, and he had that same freedom during the season. Isaiah Stewart with the threes had that same freedom during the season. So just the fact that Duran hit those shots to me was just a positive sign that it was worth him doing that.
I've talked to a few people real quick because I think Duran's got the highest ceiling of any player on the team, including Cunningham. I don't know if that's, who knows, right? The NBA people, right?
Again, I thought he was going to super high ceiling coming out. I thought that it was there. And I mean, he's young. I know he doesn't like talking about it. We had the funny laugh whenever he called Asar a kid or whatever, and then realized that Asar's actually older than him. But, he's still one of the youngest players in the league. Let's talk about Marcus Sasser, the other first round pick. This is from listener Doug McMiniman. Appreciate you, Doug, always tuning in and watching. He said, you guys think Sasser's play is helping to make Killian redundant? We don't have to touch the Killian part of that, Shawn, unless you just absolutely want to. But what did you think about Marcus Sasser? Do you think he looked good? Obviously, he had that final game where you were there and he just went bananas with the 40-point performance. But is this a kid that's going to come in and play right away? Is he a little bit more long-term? What do you think his role in the organization is right now?
So I was waiting on the off day between, it was a Wednesday game, Friday game in Vegas. Was that last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. They had practice on the Thursday, kind of out away from the strip a little bit north of the city. And I was waiting to talk to Jared Jack about a few things. And everybody else had gone. Everybody else had gotten, there were two buses. And it was just, Monty Williams was there and a couple of people on the side of the court, equipment folks. And it was just Jared Jack and Marcus Sasser and one other assistant coach who was acting as a screener. And for at least 30 minutes, maybe 45. And I was like, oh my God, I was worried about deadline because of the time difference, right? And this was in the middle of the afternoon, Vegas time. But in any case, over and over and over from various spots, Jack would have an assistant come up, set the screen. Sasser would have to navigate it, get around, with some physicality, and they wanted him pulling up, sometimes at the elbow, sometimes, 14 feet out on the wing. And they were doing it in spots where Monty Williams thinks they're going to get shots, right, in the regular season. And just watching him do that, he was just so smooth and so good with the ball, which I don't think I realized how good with the ball he was. And
I didn't either.
We're talking about Thompson maybe not being quite as good with the ball as we thought. This guy is just the opposite, right? And watching him in practice do that, and then the next night, he still wasn't shooting well, and he said, okay, to heck with this. And he did the very same thing he just repped out for 45 minutes in practice. In fact, I talked to him after the game about it. And he said, and it was just so smooth. And I think he's going to be able to go get buckets against second units in that mid-range right away.
I think so too. I talked to some guys at Houston, like Kelvin Sampson and one of their assistants and a couple of players about Sasser, and they were like, people talk about the defense and the shot, but his handle, was good. And they were like, that unlocks a lot of his game. So, I mean, that 40-point game obviously was an outburst, but a guy that can handle the ball like that, you would think would be able to get some buckets on that second unit, as you said.
What surprised you about that 40-point game? The wiggle with the ball.
Oh, some of his finishes were great.
Yeah, and some of the finishes, some of the stop-start, the change of speed, the hip movement with the change of direction. I was like, wow. I don't think I saw that in the first 4 games.
I mean, I do a lot of NBA draft stuff, not just for the Pistons, but just in general. I scout all of these guys, especially first. I didn't know he had that. I knew he was a really good shooter. I thought he'd come in, just catch and shoot off the ball. But you're right, Shawn. If he can do some of this stuff, and he has some good passes as well. So
he did
be a point of attack defender against smaller guys. We all know this. You can't switch with him. I get it. It limits some of the stuff you can do with him. And maybe it limits how much you can play him in some playoff series when that matters a little bit down the road. But in the regular season where teams don't take advantage of that stuff quite as much on a night in, night out basis, especially with the second unit, he can come in, knock shots down off ball. If he can do it on ball also, are you kidding me, Shawn? That's a lot.
No, the ball skill really surprised me. I mean, obviously you knew he could dribble. He's a guard, right, at a good program. So you knew he can handle, but not like that. It's funny. I was talking to Thompson about him. He's like, that's my guy. Because those two already have they're very like-minded, right? I mean, I know I don't want to be, look, we're not parroting the company line with why we've wanted these guys, right? Why the organization, but he does have. It was interesting to listen to Thompson talk about Sasser. He's like, this guy gets up and he's real quiet. In fact, Jarrett Jack told me that one of the things they're working on with him is get him to talk. Because he's too quiet. And I asked Sasser about that after one of the games, and he's like, yeah, I just have always let my play speak for itself. And I'm like, really? Because you were a guard, right? And he's like, well, he could, in college, he could get away with it because the coach calls out a lot more stuff. You get a lot more direction from the bench. It's not as much improv, right? Generally. And so he could get away with it. And plus he was just, really, really good for that level. But that's one of the things he's really, really working on, and the team's already trying to get him is to speak up and talk.
I really like what we saw from both of those guys. And, I can't wait for the season, but we got a few months. Let's talk about Tom Gores. Shawn, I know, Omari, you got to be around a little bit. Shawn, you wrote a whole article on the Free Press. Let's just start with, what was your biggest takeaway from your conversation and interview with Tom Gores? And then I have some that I want to bring up, and Omari does as well, that we'll talk about specifically. But just your biggest takeaway from your opportunity to talk about the team with the owner of the team.
That he acknowledges that you can only do so much, right? That it's. I think I even used this quote in the story that it's like he feels like they've got things in place for the first time since he's owned the team in a way that's really promising. Not that that's denigrating anything before, right? But with a young core and the right coach coming in, what he hopes, and all of that. So he's hopeful. I feel like for the first time in a way that he has not been before. And maybe he acknowledges a little bit, he was dictating, he wants playoffs, right? And the whole Blake Griffin move and all of that. But that was my biggest takeaway, is that he really cares. He knows it's been a long time, not just this rebuild, but just since he bought the team, right? And that he's hopeful. But he also said, but it's basketball, and you just never know.
When I sat down with Tom, my takeaway was cautiously optimistic, but also, I won't say uncertainty, but I think understanding that you can't rush it at all, right? Like, you're desperate to win. You really want to get this thing going. I know he told you that maybe the rebuild's take a little bit longer than he wants, but they don't want to repeat the same mistakes that they made in the past. They don't want to repeat the same mistakes.
Well, and I don't know that he said the rebuild. I saw some people react to that. That might have been my fault for not clarifying that. Not in the quote, but just in the column in general.
Yeah.
And maybe it was the headline that helped with that, or helped. He's talking about having a winner.
Yeah.
In Detroit since he owned the team. I don't know that he's specifically criticizing Weaver that this is taking long.
No, definitely not.
Just in general, since he's had the team that's taken so long to get to a winning organization.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he meant. And you could tell he was frustrated with that. And he feels the fans' frustration. He does. And he cares. And I was thinking about this, and I wrote this, think about who he's brought in. He's brought in guys with really good resumes.
I said when the Monty Williams thing happened, Shawn, everybody crushes Tom. I don't know all of the stuff, but what I do know is, as a fan of different organizations, I want my owner to essentially do what Tom Gores does. Put the money up when they need the money, and then let those people make the decisions. And I felt like that's what he did with Monty Williams. Is he did whatever it took. He found the guy he felt like the organization trusted. And I don't know, maybe Weaver thought that we can talk about that some other time. But at the end of the day, I think you got the best coach on the market, and Gores put up everything he needed to make it happen. To me, that's all I really care about from my owner, is that he puts the money up, and then whenever big decisions need to be made, he's there to make them. And so I'm okay with that.
Well, let's see what happens. I will tell you guys this, and Omari might know this probably, but when I was talking with Thompson after practice, we were breaking down a lot of the little things he did. And I was asking him because some of it's feel, but you can tell a lot of things he does have been repped out, like the closeout. I'm like, all right, who worked with you on that? And so we talked about all that. And you know who he credits more than anybody with making him the fundamental tough ass player he is? Kevin Ollie.
There you go.
And when he was talking about that, I just thought, yeah, this explains, you can see why, from Weaver's perspective, if he's seeing this kind of stuff being taught at this level and the kind of player Thompson is, that right? Maybe you're hoping he can do that for a whole team. So it's not crazy to think that he wanted him, right? Just based on what he's done with Thompson.
I had another quote too. It said, "We've never had a core group like this," and I think that one spoke to me, Omari, because as the fan base, and I will include myself in this, I know you guys aren't fans, but we jumped the gun after the Cade draft. It was, we have Killian and Sadiq and Stu and now Cade, and now we're going to go win 40, 50 games. And obviously injuries have resulted in some of this being slower, but I think now they truly have the young core. I think it's fair to say that they believe they truly have a young core of 4 guys in Cade, Ivy, Asar, and Duran. And then obviously you can throw in Stu and some other guys. So I think it's interesting that Gores said that we now have that young core. That one kind of stood out to me.
For this plan that they've been on, last season was probably the only one that didn't go according to plan. And that was because Cade got hurt. So you didn't necessarily see the progress the team has made. But, I think that still plays into their approach for this offseason, right? Like, we didn't see Cade last year. So you still have this evaluation you have to do, and we don't need to jump the gun and start adding, expensive pieces who, may not necessarily be the guys you need when some of these guys grow up, right? And they're aware that we're going to have to pay Cade soon, this and that. You've got some big decisions coming up. So cautious optimism, but also I just think that they are aware that next season is going to be a really big evaluation year that, I think in some ways could, define the next 4 or 5 years after that.
I don't even think there was serious. I don't know that they talked at all, or if they did, it was very brief with Cam Johnson. And I was told by a couple of sources, not my sources, just people that are high up in the, let's just say high up in the company that has a lot of control over the Pistons, that they were very, very adamant that they felt like there were mistakes made in the past with passing out those kind of contracts to guys that aren't difference makers unless you're ready to win a title, right?
I love it. Like, I think it's smart. What are your personal thoughts on it, Shawn? Because this has really been an issue for the fan base, was they didn't go make these big moves. And to me, it's like, they're not ready for that. You don't even know for sure what the young core is.
I was up at Moneyball a few weeks ago, to watch the Michigan State incoming freshman. And I got into an argument with a media guy up there who's, big Pistons fan, and he was talking about Cam Johnson or somebody. I'm like, but they're not. Who? And look, I don't want to get into a bashing Cam Johnson session here, but who's Cam Johnson, right? I mean, he's the 5th best player,
and injury prone, as me and Omari have talked about.
Fans rank things based on excitement rather than the overarching plan, right? Like, paying him all that money would have been exciting, but what hole is he filling when you don't even necessarily know what this roster is, right? Like how many more wins is he going to get you next season?
I don't know how much freedom Weaver had to do that anyway. I mean, if he tried to do something, not that he wanted to. I'm not saying he wanted to at all. I don't think he did. But if he'd wanted to, I think that the larger organization feels like they've just made a couple mistakes.
Yeah. Tom, he tried to spend them out of problems, and he did come up big with Monty, but you can't just spend a bunch of money and expect things to click.
I thought was interesting that Shawn will get, and I know we got to close it out, and you've been talking all day on podcast. If the hope doesn't turn into wins, I'll be looking for new voices to make the choices, and the cycle will keep spinning. This is how it goes too, and everyone involved understands this. Are
those my words?
I don't see them in quotes, Omari. So, but to me, like, I like hearing that. If that's something, if you felt and got the vibe that was where Gores and the organization is.
I did. Yeah. They all know what's at stake. Everybody understands what's at stake. They're trying to do this in a different way and what they consider the right way and a smart way. And they all know if it doesn't work, then the owner's not going anywhere, then you try again. Right? I mean, at some point, owning a professional sports team you can affect things, right? You can change the culture one way or the other for good or for bad. You can decide to spend or not. And those are obviously huge things. You can force your front office to go draft somebody based on some whim, whatever. But for the most part, as an owner, you're hiring the people that you think are the best, that you hire other people that sort of scout for you, who's going to run the front office, the coach, and all that. And then you put your team, you give your team over, and that's it. Right? It's not like you've come up through the ranks. Owners haven't come up through basketball. Like another kind of business that's running a company, that person generally has something to do with what that company does. It's not that way in pro sports. So it's just, you're just handing it over and crossing your fingers.
And that's what Tom's tried to figure out, right? Because he gave Stan all that power, and he'll admit now that probably wasn't the right move to control the basketball operations.
But it wasn't the worst idea in the way. I mean,
No.
It's easy to say that now, but this guy had been to a finals, had taken a separate franchise to the conference finals, and was regarded as one of the best coaches in the league at that point, or one of the better basketball minds in the league. How about that?
Yeah, it's been a learning process for him. I think the last 10, 11 years since he's on the team, he's just been learning what it takes to win.
How good an owner is Joe Lacob if they don't luck into Steph Curry?
A lot of it is outside of your control, honestly. You just need things to click. Nobody thought Draymond was going to, 36 pick or whatever he was, be a defensive player of the year and everything else he's accomplished.
Did you clarify? Did you find the quote or that paragraph, Omari?
That was Shawn's words.
Yeah. So just to clarify that, I think I said quote before I said that. So just from the article with Shawn, I just found that interesting. Like I said, especially if Shawn kind of was getting that vibe. And again, I like that. I think that's what we love about sports is there's pressure. And if you don't do your job, they find that's what happens to players, right? Killian Hayes doesn't do his job. The fan base wants him to find somebody else. It's just...
Yeah, he's got one more chance, by the way, Hayes, right?
Yeah. And probably rightfully so, right? I mean, he got his this year. I think they should give him this year. And if he doesn't show it, he had his chance with this organization. That's what I loved about it. I love as a player, and I never got to that level, as you guys know, and all the listeners know, but I love knowing if I don't get the job done, somebody's going to take my job. And that's what made me work so hard. I think there's some good in that. And so I don't mind, you getting that vibe and that feeling. And so that kind of stood out to me.
No, I mean, if Ivy and Duren and Cunningham, especially Cunningham, don't turn out, I mean, then yeah, that's just the nature of things. There's going to be somebody else making decisions on who the next core is. And you can say, okay, that's Weaver's fault and he'll lose his job for that for sure. But again, even from Weaver's perspective, it's still a roll of the dice. It's a 50-50 proposition at best, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look at Cam Whitmore, Omari. This was the Cam Whitmore friendly podcast. We would have taken him at 5 and he went 20. We had no idea what we were talking about. And I know these guys have more. I know
nobody had him falling that far. Out of fairness to us, nobody had him falling all the way to 20.
He balled out in Vegas. So
he balled out in Vegas. If his knees last longer than 5 years, there's going to be a lot of medical staffs that are getting fired to the point of our conversation.
No
right
question.
now.
It'll be like Michael Porter Jr., right? Everybody freaked out about him. Then he falls all the way to 10 or 12, wherever he went, but he went lower than he should have.
No question. If he stays healthy and the signs he showed out in Vegas he's just gonna build on that. Yeah, look out.
Do your job. Hopefully, get a bit of lucky, or it's the nature of the business.
But then the guy who just won the best player on the team that just won the title, he's a second rounder.
All right, we got to close it out, Shawn. This was great. Just a couple shout outs. Will J, love the show, guys. We'll talk about Isaiah Livers in the next upcoming episodes. Appreciate you. And then from Chili Damon, there are plenty of moves that don't hose the cap. Real quick here, Shawn, can I do it? Do you think that they need to fill any rosters? Like, do you feel like there's a big hole there at the power forward, or, between Stu, Boyan, Livers, you think they're okay?
I mean, I'd give Livers another run. To me, before you commit, because he we're talking earlier about off-ball defense and team defense. He's just a smart player, and if the shot is, and he's got some sneaky competitive streak in him too. I like the way he competes. The shot's got to be there, right?
Yep.
But I could see him getting a little bit better. To me, it's just those four guys and what he got, and they're going to develop. And then can Stewart shoot? I think you're fine. At this point, make your moves when you see what you got. If you can get closer, then go.
Agreed, 100%. Shawn, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Everybody, we'll be back Tuesdays from now on. This Wednesday drop was my fault. I was on vacation, so we had to wait to record. We'll be going live, whether it's Sunday, Monday, something like that. We appreciate you, and we will read some more of those ratings and reviews you guys have left next episode. We didn't want Shawn to have to hang out too long before we dove in with him, so we'll read some of those. Keep dropping those on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all of those things. Omari, take it away, my guy. Shawn, thank you again for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, and we'll definitely do it again as we get closer to the season. Talk some ball. Maybe the Pistons will have another move or two we could discuss by then.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And also big shout out to Wes as always. And we'll talk to you all next Tuesday.